Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and while I don't want to jinx anything, it seems like life is getting back to normal. And I will say, I recorded this intro a couple weeks ago before I went to the Proving Grounds event. So while it's a week late, it's still my thoughts and feelings and I'm not re-recording the intro. So it feels like things are changing for the better, and my intros don't need to revolve around the pandemic, about an angry, racist America. I mean, our presidential situation still kind of sucks, but it's better than it was before in my opinion. Other than the leadership situation in this country kind of blowing it for the past 5 years, the big red flag that I'm seeing these days is the whole Texas abortion thing. I feel bad for Texans as it is, but this is fucking crazy. No man should tell a woman what she can or can't do to her body like they're doing today. I mean, my wife wanted me to get a vasectomy, and I said, no, you can't tell me what to do with my body. Why should someone else be able to tell her what to do with hers? And this new abortion law? Well, it's so Texas, and I hope we don't start seeing it elsewhere, or else women everywhere will be fucked. Literally and figuratively. Someone who isn't fucked is my guest this week. He's an Australian Olympian in Moguls, and a guy ESPN called the 46th most influential person in all of action sports. He's fitter and riskier than almost anyone listening, athlete or not. I'm talking about Canadian Halfpipe Team head coach Trennon Paynter, and his podcast is so interesting. Before I get into it, I want to ask you to tell a friend about the show. I'm no athlete or existing personality with a built-in audience, so word of mouth really helps the show grow. And if it grows, well, it only gets better. At least I want to think that it only gets better. I also want to ask you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. I'm so close to 10,000 followers, and when I get there, I unlock all kinds of features. So please help your little Jewish friend out with a follow. Finally, I want to ask you to support the great brands who make this show happen. They are Stanley, Alpine Vans, Dragon, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Rollerblade, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk to Trennon Paynter. You have to be one of the oldest people involved in ski halfpipe in the world, I feel like. You're like, what, 53-ish?
I'm 51, soon to be 52.
Okay, so you're 53-ish, we'll call you.
Yeah, that works.
And then how young are some of the kids you're coaching? Like the youngest guys that you work with, how young are they?
The youngest on the team at the moment is 18.
And what are the things you just don't understand about the young kids these days, whether it's the music or the shit they're into or the social? There's got to be some things where there's a disconnect where you just don't get it.
Yeah, there's a lot. I feel like I was probably one of those guys who I probably midlife crisised a lot of the early days where I was in my kind of late 30s, early 40s and trying to sort of hang with the kids. And I bought some extra baggy pants and all the weird shit like that. And then I think I finally am at a point where I've decided I can give up on trying to be them and step into my elder statesman role. But yeah, obviously the social side is huge. I dabble in it myself, of course. You know, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. So I understand what that is a bit, but the importance that it seems to play in people's lives these days is definitely different. And in particular, the importance it plays in people's athletic careers, right? Their sponsorships depend, it seems like, often as much on the social media side of things as their competition results. And that's an area where, as a coach, we can get into situations where we're sometimes trying to balance what we think maybe is best for them athletically, sometimes can conflict with what their needs are to market themselves and pay for this shit. So that's kind of a different world, certainly the sponsorship side, because for me, certainly initially coming up as an athlete, everything in that realm was dependent on your results. So your sponsorship and your athletic career were kind of quite tied in terms of what's the best thing for me here. It was generally always in line because it was like, well, what are the steps that are going to get you to the top of the podium? Because that is going to directly relate to you getting a better contract and being able to continue as a full-time athlete and being paid for it, things like that. So that's probably one of the biggest ones with younger generation. And then some other areas for me, probably, especially for me being so old that I grew up in the 70s where things were pretty loose in terms of I guess, safety.
Yeah.
Like I grew up where everyone rode in the back of pickup trucks everywhere. And, we all doubled bikes around sitting on each other handlebars. No one ever had a helmet. You built the sketchiest jumps you could find out of pallets and shit. And there was just far less safety protocols out in the world. And for the most part, we all survived it just fine.
Yep.
So some of it is just me being an old man, like, Jesus, man, why is everyone so soft these days? Like no one wants to do anything unless it's ultra triple protected, and just get out there and get radical. And sometimes for me to see how even some younger, quote, extreme sport athletes still have they have this, it seems almost a little conservative mindset around risk is weird for me. Cause I'm like, that's weird, man. Like, cause I came from a more like, just get out there and give her.
Just pin it, yeah.
And I feel like stuff is maybe a little more, everyone's just a little more protective. Sometimes people are a little more protective about things. And I feel like for a young generation, they seem to be quite risk averse sometimes, which I don't get, because when it was my age, it was like the people in that age group who were doing the best in those kind of gnarlier sports were the sort of real risk taker personalities. And now you're seeing people who aren't risk takers from a personality sense who are excelling in this exceptionally risky sport. That's a puzzle to me.
Do you attribute a lot of that to the way that people have taken everything to trampolines these days? And when you were younger and when you were coming up, people were learning tricks on their own and they were crashing and figuring it out from there. And there were injuries that were a part of it. But eventually it all went to foam pits, resi ramps, and trampolines. And maybe it hasn't taken a lot of the risk out of it, but it's made people a lot more familiar with the tricks. So it makes it where they're going to land a lot more when they're on snow.
Yeah, well, you're right. I guess that brings up a few different angles to look at that concept, because for sure, the way that people can learn a complex skill now, they just have such a kind of better, more attainable, safer path towards it with all of these things you just said, right? We have trampolines, we have foam pits, we have airbags, all of these things. And none of us getting started had that available to us. For us, it was like hope for a powder day at the wind lip.
Yeah.
That's when I did my first double. Like my first double on snow was I waited for, it dumped, and I'm like, sweet, today's the day. Go to the wind lip, carve out a hit, go for it, right? And yeah, now these steps can be, and it's great. Like I love the fact that we have this technology now that allows people to learn these skills in a much safer way and in a way quicker way. And obviously you look at what people are doing now is just so gnarly and so awesome, right? And so I don't think we would be seeing the skills we're seeing without all of these safety measures in place. But yeah, in some cases, I feel like some people are just becoming really dependent on all these safety factors and viewing anything outside of highly protected as crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a real difference between, okay, there's not as safe as the other thing, but that doesn't necessarily make it crazy, right? There are people who will tell you that for someone to just go skiing for a day, like a family to go skiing at a resort and ski groomed runs, to do that without a helmet is crazy. Right. And I'm like, that's not crazy at all, dude. Like,
that's what we did.
It's what everyone did for years and years and years and decades and decades. And it wasn't like the hospitals were filling up with dead people because these guys were out there skiing groomers without helmets. Right. So people just get used to what they see, and they say anything outside of that is, oh, that's just nuts. And it's like, well, no, it's not nuts. I guess some people just have a black and white view of things. But for example, we have a super trampoline, right?
Your whole backyard, isn't it all trampolines?
My whole backyard is trampolines, and the central feature is this super trampoline, which is just the coolest toy anyone's ever built. It was built by this guy. He's the national team head coach for Trampoline Canada, and he's a bit of a mad scientist. And he invented this super trampoline. It's just massive, and it sends you higher than any other trampoline in the world, right? It's this giant, super bouncy trampoline. Like, holy shit, this thing's awesome.
What's a super trampoline cost? Sorry.
Well, all in, when I bought this one, I got them to build us a brand new frame. The bed was used. It was the one that we had gone and actually tested out. We had gone to this facility in Toronto and jumped on it for a few training camps. And that's when I sort of decided, hey, we should just have our own one of these instead of having to fly the team out for camps. So I convinced the guy to sell me that one that we were using, the bed. They built us a new frame. We got some pads donated from the freestyle venues from the 2010 Olympics to help do some of the padding. So all in, it was about 14 grand we had to drop to get the thing started. And then what I was getting at, so we bought the Tramp thinking that, okay, we should have one of these. Let's order it, and then we'll get it out west and put it somewhere, and we'll use it a lot more. And during the time period between me buying it and it arriving, I started looking around for like, oh, where are we going to put this thing? And realizing, well, shit, here's a challenge, right? It's not actually easy or cheap to find a space big enough to accommodate the super trampoline. Like, what are we going to do? Rent a huge warehouse, jackhammer holes in the floor to put it in ground, pay $4,000 a month for rental for where we're going to need to house this thing.
Right.
And then the next thing you know, while I'm going through that puzzle, I get a phone call like, hey, your giant trampoline, this trailer full of junk arrived at the freestyle office. Come get it out of here. It's in our parking spaces. I was like, oh, shit. Okay. So I grab Rory Bushfield and him and I drive down to the city, grab this thing, drive it up to my place. And I said, hey, well, let's see, maybe, I'm like, I think there might be just enough room in my backyard to put this thing up for now. So why don't we just put it up for now? And obviously I need to figure out where it's going to go for a training spot, right? But in the meantime, it's like, well, shit, I got space in my yard. So Rory and I set it up in my backyard. And all of a sudden, I now have the world's best trampoline in my backyard. And we're so fucking stoked, man. Bushy and I, like, just, this is awesome. And we're just having all these sessions on it. And I reach out to the team. I don't know if I phoned them or sent messages like, guys, okay, we got the Super Tramp. I've set it up at my house. We're still trying to figure out where its permanent home is going to be, but for now it's set up in my yard. Like, let's get going, man. This is awesome. And the response I got was, whoa, dude, that seems really sketchy. Because, I mean, from a certain angle it was, because it was like this freestanding frame. The frame had pads around it. I had one end up against my deck, so sort of one side of it was sort of in ground at level with my deck. Basically, there were three sides that if you flew off the thing, you were going to fall and hit some gnarly shit. Like, there was rocks on one side, there was like a deck on one side and a shed on the other. So it was like, okay, don't fly off this thing or you're going to get smoked, right? Which every trampoline I ever jumped on in my entire life as a child was like that.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, unless you went to a gymnastics club, right?
Yeah, you just don't want to fall off. That's kind of the goal.
Yeah,
don't hit the metal and don't fall off.
Yeah, so Rory and I are just like sessioning this thing and loving it. And none of the athletes would show up for it. They were like, nope, that seems too sketchy. And I was just like, what the fuck? How can these 20-year-old, like, best in the world, quote, extreme athletes be going, no, I don't want to go jump on the best trampoline in the world.
Right.
Unless there are triple safety features all the way around it. And again, I'm not trying to argue against all the safety features around it because those are good things. And that's what I eventually did and built in. And that was the end goal. And it's like, well, but it's not a black and white, right? It's not like there's either you can use this or it's a write-off. There's like, well, one's ultra safe, one's just got more risk involved. So you manage it. So I'm not suggesting you guys come over and try and learn a new triple that you've never done before on this thing, because there's a risk of flying off it and we don't want to do that. But you could still come and get a ton of shit done, like me and Bushy are every single day, and we never killed ourselves, right? And we're not anywhere near as good as you guys.
And you guys think it's fun, right? Like, where they might be scared, this is what you live for. It's like, you got this thing set up. Yeah, there's danger. And while you might be a little more calculated than Bushy, you both have that same mentality of like, let's have a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, Bushy was almost upset when I put all the safety features around it because I'd taken some of the danger out. Like, I think he's drawn to danger just purely for the sake of danger.
Okay.
Whereas I feel like I'm certainly drawn to some sports and activities that people consider dangerous, but in my mind, it's not because they're dangerous. It's because of the feeling you get from doing these things, and there's a danger involved. So that's there. But I think he just liked the fact that he would have put like a spike pit behind it, you know, like, oh, if you have that, you're going to get impaled on a spike or something. Then it's really cool. It's like, well, I don't need to go that far. But yeah, so That was, I thought, such an interesting kind of thing in the psychology of where people are at, because it's like, man, it's, I guess, and I have to step back and assess. It's like, well, either I'm just quite reckless at heart and not aware of it, or the younger demographic has just got a little more conditioned to certain levels of safety, and anything outside of that seems nuts. I feel like that's a weird thing, because we're in this sport that's supposed to be about pushing boundaries and being really creative and taking risk, right? Like, we're a risky sport. So I find it just sort of fascinating that some of these athletes who are so good at this really risky stuff, who actually seem really averse to taking risks other than a couple very specific ones. I guess I feel like I'm sort of being critical of these guys now, which is not necessarily a critique. It's just an observation. It's really surprised me a lot to encounter that.
Yeah, I mean, before the Woodwards became the standard for all these guys to train at, that was the mentality. Pin it, and we'll figure it out later. If you get hurt, you get hurt, but that's part of the game. And people, when they did get hurt, it was like, charge that shit to the game, man. That's what we do. But it sounds like it's not as much of what they do now. Yes, they do the tricks and the difficulties getting higher and higher, but there are the safety measures put in where they feel safer, and there isn't the risk that you experienced in that you almost thrive off of. Like, that's part of it too, is like, hey, I'm going to live through this and nail this trick, and I'm going to make it part of my repertoire. And those guys are just doing it a different way now.
Yeah, for sure. And like any group of people, there's obviously, even within the group of athletes that I've been coaching and all the athletes I've coached over the last 15, 20 years, there's been vast differences, right? Some of those people have been real risk takers and totally down to do some crazy shit. And others have been just a lot more kind of calculated, and they'll do some very specific risky activities, but not as willing to venture outside into others. So a lot of it's, I guess, just the differences in people. But certainly I feel like, yeah, I guess like anything, you get used to something and then it gets taken away and it feels really wrong. And the action sports space has become quite used to a lot of safety measures being part of the progression into this area now. It just wasn't there. Yeah, right. I mean, we never had Woodward. We never had airbags. I never got to go jump on the world's best trampoline. But had I been called up at 19 and told about that thing, I would have driven a day to do it.
Right. You'd have been salivating. Like, you have what?
Like, for sure. Like, hell yeah. And if they said, oh, by the way, it's set up above ground and there's a couple spots where if you flew off, you'd get hurt, I'd be like, yeah, okay, cool. That's good to know. Thanks. Let me at it. Like,
yeah, you're like, cool, I'll put an elbow pad on, I'll be good.
Yeah, like, I'm not going to set a left cork 10 because I drift that thing to the left. And so maybe I won't play with that facing that direction. I'd come up with different ways to manage it and not just write it off as like, I'm not doing that, period. Yeah.
But I guess these elite athletes these days, they do have a lot more to risk than maybe you had when you were a 14 or 15-year-old.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, and that's a totally different story, and we're going to talk about your coming up because you have a different upbringing than most people. You were born, I think, in Sydney, Australia, but your parents are both Canadian, and how long did you live in Australia?
Yeah, so I lived in Australia for about almost just right around 5 years. My parents were Canadian ski racers. They both grew up in Calgary and were provincial level ski racers. And then they got married and decided to move to Australia and build a sailboat, go sailing. So they did that. They moved over to Australia right after getting married, started building a sailboat in their backyard from scratch, like a ferro cement sailboat, like just building this giant rebar boat hull skeleton and pouring concrete to fill it in. So they literally created the hull from scratch.
That shit's crazy to me, that they're building it in their backyard and taking it on the water.
Yeah, like obviously they had such a great spirit of adventure, and myself and my brother Monty were born there in Australia while they were building the boat. And then shortly after it was built, we hopped on it and sailed around. I don't have too many really detailed memories because I was quite young, but I do have a few. All my first memories, like my earliest memories, are all of those years being on the boat and some pretty crazy shit and storms, and swimming with giant stingrays. And yeah, it was a pretty wild experience and just so cool of them to do that. And yeah, just build their own boat and take their two little babies out to sea on it and withstand these giant storms and shit. So pretty rad.
Were they like adventuring hippies?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
They were full adventuring hippies. Yeah, they were, like I said, super into skiing in Canada. And then they went over there, and mom was working in the library and dad was racing motorbikes a bit on the side and doing some university teaching math and riding motorbikes out in the outback, doing geophysics work and racing them. And so, yeah, my parents are just so cool. Their story is amazing, all the shit they've done.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and now is the time to order your Alpine van. If you don't know about Alpine, well, they're the one-stop shop to get your Sprinter van and have it customized into your dream adventure van. And they are the best. Don't believe me? Go to their website, alpinevans.com, scroll down to the Cody Townsend 50 Project van video, and see the build detail and quality for yourself. Cody could have gone with anyone for his van build, but he chose Alpine because those guys are designers and engineers who double as ski patrollers, mountain bikers, and surfers who spend way too much time in the elements with all of their toys in their vans. They can have your van fully customized in your driveway in 90 days. So head on over to Alpine Vans, check out their thoughtful quote builder, and get yourself the best holiday present ever early. My next sponsor is Dragon, and I have been loving all the sunglasses Dragon sent over. Thanks, Liam. I'm a huge fan of all things that make me look better, and my sunglasses definitely make me look way cooler than I am. And they'll do that for you too. But what's even more crazy is that thanks to space-age technology, my sunglasses float in water, and their Luma lens creates the most vivid colors I've seen since I went to a Dead show. On top of all that, Dragon has supported action sports athletes like Mick Fanning, Chris Ben Chetler, Danny Davis, Brian Iguchi, and many more since they started in a garage in 1993. And Dragon is making it easy for you to own a pair. All you need to do is head on over to dragonalliance.com, go shopping, and enter the code POWEL15, that's all one word, the number 15 with no spaces, and you will save 15% on your order. My final sponsor this break is Stanley. You know, the brand that invented the keep things hot and cold category back in 1913. Remember what your grandpa used to drink his hot coffee out of? That's a Stanley, and using one is more important than ever. If you're still using single-use plastics, you know, bottled water, you're blowing it. Your plastic is going to end up in our oceans, and that sucks. But you can change that, and Stanley wants to help you do that. And they're going to give you 30% off your plastic-saving water bottle and anything else you order on their website. To get the deal, head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and enter the code DRINKFAST, that's all one word, all lowercase, at checkout, and you'll get 30% off. If your order is over $75, Stanley's going to send you a limited edition Powell Movement beanie to go on top of it. Those are my sponsors this round. Now, let's get back into the podcast. When do they get rid of the boat and decide to move back to Canada and have your childhood in the mountains?
Yeah, so that was definitely at my mom's urging. I think Dad is a little more drawn to tropics and ocean. He probably could have stayed in the Southern Hemisphere and sailed around for a long time, but Mom is a real mountain woman. She missed the mountains to the point where they just decided they were going to move back to Canada and get to the mountains. So I was about 5 years old. I think it was 75. And we moved back to Canada and found a place in Kimberley, BC, which is actually where I am right now, visiting my fam. And they bought a little building, rebuilt it into a bookshop, and they started running the local bookstore, and they started coaching the local ski racing programs. And so right away, my brother and I got into ski racing. Yeah, it was kind of like moved back from Australia at 5 years old, got into school. They started kicking my Aussie accent out of me in a hurry. And next thing you know, I was just skiing every day of the winter because Kimberley has a really cool ski hill with night skiing, and it's right in town, the ski hill. So we could just ski every single day of the winter.
And so I think it's a lot of ski racing with your parents being the coaches of it. But I would guess around the same time, the hot dog movement is probably starting to happen or has started to happen. Are you aware of that kind of stuff going on as well?
Well, it's interesting because I wasn't as aware of it as I probably should have been. It certainly was going on. I remember seeing little bits and pieces of it here in Kimberley growing up. I'm surprised in hindsight that I didn't see much more of it, especially on the Moguls side, because I maintain that Kimberley Ski Hill is one of the best mogul skiing places ever, anywhere. The moguls here are awesome. The whole backside of the mountain is just these epic mogul runs. So I'm kind of surprised now looking back. I'm like, I wonder why I didn't see a lot more of a kind of freestyle representation out on the hill, but I didn't notice it a lot. Like we all like, going to find jumps and stuff and hitting them. And I had a really, really cool race coach once I moved up into more higher level racing. The race coach here in Kimberley was awesome because he would take us off and hit jump. Like we built a road gap together with our ski race coach, right? And that's the kind of guy, he was really into that shit. And we had this giant natural jump called the ore pile. We definitely were super into hitting jumps, even most of my race training. But essentially I was training to be a ski racer until I was about 16 or something. And then that coach left actually, and a new coach came in, and he was a completely opposite vibe, and it didn't work. So that was when I stopped racing. But yeah, mainly all racing from, I guess, 5 to 16.
So you get the new coach, and that kind of changes your thought process on racing. How does training for moguls come into play? Because you're at a mountain, you say, with some of the best mogul skiing in the world, so I'm sure you're just ripping the moguls all the time. But how do you get serious and focused on moguls?
Well, it's kind of funny because it didn't quite happen actually like that. So I did go ski the mogul runs, of course, back then in my 5 to 15-year-old phase of skiing and ski racing. But I didn't spend a ton of time in the bumps, and I actually don't think I was ever all that good at them back then, relative to some of the guys. Even some of my buddies in school were better in the moguls than I was. I was quite a good racer then, but I remember not being awesome at moguls. And then this whole me sort of quitting ski racing at 16 coincided with me just wanting to be a real punk, and just, all of a sudden all I cared about was getting a fake ID and getting drunk as hell as often as I could, and just partying and being an idiot, right?
Okay.
Classic small town 16-year-old, or maybe not classic, but anyways, that was me. So I went through a few years of that. I was always a little younger than everyone because I had skipped a grade early. So I graduated at 17, moved to Banff, Alberta, got a fake ID that said I was 18 because the drinking age was 18 in Alberta. So I moved out there, got a job at this big hotel, the Banff Springs Hotel in Banff, and just was a partying idiot. And I barely skied from 16 to 18. I more just was a punk.
Did you just party? Because you're like one of the fittest dudes ever who's always doing something, whether it's riding a motorcycle, hang gliding, doing something. But did you just take 2 years off and just straight up party when you're at a place where you could be skiing?
No, I don't think I became a sloth. I think I still stayed quite active. And I skied a bit. When I was in Banff, I remember working graveyard shift at the little deli in the hotel and getting off work at 7 and getting on the bus and going to Lake Louise and skiing for a day and coming back. I still made an effort to ski a bit, for sure. I was always drawn to anything that I thought was kind of a radical something. So if there was a rope swing into a lake, or there was a trampoline in a guy's backyard that we would always go poach in Banff that we'd just go sneak into and jump on. So I think I still was certainly into moving.
Seeking out danger?
Yeah, maybe seeking out danger a bit, but at least movement and things that required some level of exercise as a component of them. I think that kept me at least reasonably fit. And I had trained quite hard all those early years growing up as a ski racer. So I had a decent level of fitness to begin with. And then I did enough to maintain it, I suppose, even though I was partying a lot to 18. And then anyways, I'm taking forever to get back to your question here on moguls. Is I feel like I actually started getting a little more into moguls then. I remember going to Lake Louise and skiing some bump runs and being like, oh, this is pretty fun, and maybe spending more time on the bump runs in those years. Then I moved back to Kimberley, and now I'm, I don't know, like 19, I guess. And I really remember having this feeling of being a little depressed about throwing away a competitive ski career I felt like I had done. Because I was a pretty good racer. I wasn't the best, but I was pretty good. I was on track to move into the next level and probably provincial teamy sort of thing at minimum. And then depending how I progressed, maybe I could have gone even further. So I knew that I had a chance in racing, doing as well as I had done. And then a couple years went by, and I remember just like, oh, I'm an idiot, man. I had a chance to maybe be a pretty competitive skier. I was pretty good, and I just kind of bailed on it all. What a bummer. And I think a couple years of not skiing a lot had made me start to really want to ski a lot again. So I got a job at the Kimberley Ski Hill, and I started off as a lifty, and I would ask for the night shift so that I could ski all day. And it gave me a season's pass, and I would just be loading T-bars for night skiing. So it was great. So all of a sudden it's like, cool, I can ski all day every day and then just work at night on the ski hill. And then that was when I really started just hammering the bump runs, because they were the most challenging terrain on the hill, and they were at least these things that you could jump off of too,
Yeah.
And I think I just hit that critical point where all of a sudden I got good enough at them that probably my ego kicked in, and I'm like, okay, I'm good enough now that I feel like I can show off at this shit.
Right.
And the best bump run on the hill was the one right under the chairlift. It's called the Easter run. And all of a sudden I just lived on the Easter run. I spent about 2 years that was my run, man.
That was your Hollywood? Everybody watching?
Exactly. Oh yeah. Yeah. And I was just the guy who went out and shredded under the chair, under the Easter, the moguls every day. And I was completely self-taught. Like I had no idea. I didn't know anything about competitive freestyle or even technique or anything, but I just skied bumps all day, every day. And so I got really good at them. I'd go really damn fast through them. And people started to tell me like, dude, like, do you compete? You should compete in that shit. I was like, oh, geez, maybe I should try that. I guess I don't know. And then I had also taken a bunch of first aid training, applied for a job as a ski patrol. So I went from a lifty to a ski patrol because I was like, yeah, well, that's even better. Now I can ski all day and all night. Right? Because I'm skiing for work and I'm skiing for pleasure. And so, yeah, I remember getting in all kinds of trouble as a ski patrol when our ski patrol boss at one point was skiing down the Easter and someone yelled down, do another backflip. Like, what the fuck? Because that was me, right? So now I was ski patrolling. So I would patrol night shifts so that I could ski day shift. So yeah, I was just banking ski hours like you wouldn't believe, right? And then eventually these local guys from Kimberley Cranbrook area who were sort of retired at this point, they were kind of like 70s hot dogger guys who weren't competing anymore, but they were still in the area. And one of them just found me one day and was like, dude, I've been watching you ski this run for years and we got to get you to a competition. And they made it their little project to get me off to some comps. So that was really fun because it was like this OG freestyle crew who just reeled me in and drove me off to a few competitions. And I did really well. I won kind of right out of the gate. I started winning these contests that I was going to and got invited to nationals and came somewhere in the top 10 my first time at nationals. And then I get this phone call or letter like, you're being offered a spot on the Canadian National Development Team.
Huh.
I'm like, what the hell, dude? It was so weird and unexpected, but I'm like, oh my God, seriously? Like it to me felt just so, it was just this amazing thing because like I had said earlier, I really felt that I had given up on having a potential to have a competitive ski career. And I really had those regrets of quitting racing because after a few years of partying, I was like, anyone can do this shit, but not as many people could be a real high-end competitive skier. And I could have done that. And I passed on the chance. And now all of a sudden I had it was like this real renewed second chance feeling. So I was so motivated to get into it. It was just awesome. And I was this real, I'm sure, entertaining novelty piece for everyone on the team because everyone else on the national development team was more of a traditional kid who had got into a freestyle program young, come up through club programs, provincial teams, and then made it into the national development team. So they had a lot of experience in the sport, in the competitive side. They'd had coaching. They knew who everyone was. They knew the circuit. I didn't know anything. I was this weird, like hillbilly, redneck, mullet, mustache, cigarette chain smoker from Kimberley BC who was way older than everyone who rolled into this program. And I'm sure everyone was like, what the fuck is this dude's deal? Like, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know who the people on the national team were. I had never had any sort of coaching. Like I had no idea what the concept of absorption extension was because I'd never had to do it because the bumps in Kimberley were soft, so I could just smash them. I didn't have a clue how to ski icy moguls. First contest, we went off to Lake Placid. You could see through the moguls to the terrain underneath. Like that's how icy they were. I'm like, why would anyone ever do this? Like what, it was like, right. And my technique was just smash through bumps. So yeah, like, oh my God, I'm on a national ski team. I've got to get healthy. And so I quit smoking and I started training my ass off. And I got really into the fitness training part of the program, in part because I was older than most of the team. Most of the kids were 16, 17, and I was 20, 21 or something now, I guess, when I got invited onto the development team. And I always got a little bit undersold in terms of there was always a coach evaluation component of team selection, and there was a potential category. And we used to see this. We used to always get it at the end of the year. You'd see your evaluation. And I'd always get this real low score on potential because of, I assume, my age. They just like, this guy's a little old. He's, he probably doesn't have the potential of these kids. And I really took that to heart and was kind of like, fuck you guys, let me show you. So I made it my mission to work extra hard. And certainly on the fitness space, that was a spot where you can do it. It's like, okay, well, skill is skill and you work on that. Maybe you get as skilled as the other guy, maybe you don't, but I can control working out more than all these guys. So I did. So I just got insanely strong. Like I was a superhuman at 25. It was amazing. I remember I could just walk into anywhere and just look around and go, I know I can jump higher, run faster, lift more than anyone in this room. Like it was really cool. I loved that.
Well, it sounds like if you were in a room of people your age, it would still be the same kind of thing of you being a superhuman. But what I heard, and I want to see if this is true, is that when you first started in those mogul runs, like you would have almost a cigarette in hand and you're like spitting your cigarette butt out right at the start gate. Is there any truth to that?
That did happen at one point. Yeah. It was my very first year when I won my first or second contest. I was literally in the gate with the smoke and they're like, okay, competitor ready. And I take a drag of my smoke and flick it off to the side. I'm like, yep. And I won the comp. And yeah, people are just like, what the fuck? I remember actually a coach, a really cool guy. He was coaching the New Zealand freestyle team at the time. And he came up to me afterwards and he's like, hey man, like, I really like you. Like I got along with everyone really well, but he was good. He gave me this talk about specifically the cigarette and the start gate. And he's like, you've kind of won the last couple of these comps. So there's a lot of kids here who are starting to look up to you. And maybe you shouldn't be having a cigarette in the start gate. Just, he very kindly let me know what should have been blindingly obvious to me that, dude, you're setting a terrible example here. Come on. I probably thought it was sort of cool at the time. But he talked to me in a way where I was, oh yeah, this isn't actually cool. So that only happened the one time, the cigarette in the start gate, but it did happen.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and Peter Glenn Ski and Sports has been getting people out there for over 60 years, and in this digital age, they always have a contest going. This week, Peter Glenn is teaming up with Giro to give away 2 helmet and goggle combos. 2 lucky winners will receive either an Axis goggle and Union MIPS helmet, or an Ella goggle and Fade MIPS helmet. I'd tell you how great these are, but I don't have the time. Entering, though, is easy. Head on over to Peter Glenn Sports on Instagram and make sure you're following Peter Glenn Sports and Giro Snow. Like the Giro giveaway post, tag 2 friends in the comments that would look great in either Giro combo, and the winner will be selected on Friday, September 24th. Remember, only 1 entry per person, and good luck. Next up is Rollerblade. And while they've been sold out of a lot of products due to the inline craze that started again in 2020, new product is coming and it's time to snatch it up. If you already have your blades, you know ski season is right around the corner. But are you ready for it? You can be. Head on over to the App Store and search for the Rollerblade Skate to Ski app. There you'll find the best practices of using your skates to get you ready to carve up the mountain. It's free, it's fun, and you can either download the app or get the details about it over at rollerblade.com. I'm saving the best for last, and there's no better brand to work with in action sports than the 10 Barrel Brewery. And how can a beer be part of action sports, you ask? Well, they do more than most brands do. They sponsor a team of world-class skiers, skaters, and bikers. They produce movies around the team. They sponsor important events, throw their own events, whatever. You get it. And what I'm loving the most about 10 Barrel lately is their new Pilsner. It's so light, crisp, and tasty. Next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel's Pilsner, and I bet it becomes one of your new favorite beers. To find out more about all things 10 Barrel, head on over to 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. It's like your cold trickle kind of, if you've seen Days of Thunder, where like you don't know what's going on the mogul scene, but you're really good at it. And you might have seen it here and there, but the second that you enter it, you like take over. And given you might not be good right away at icy bumps, but soon enough, you're going to figure all that stuff out, just like Cold Trickle did. But before I talk about your mogul career, I want to talk about movies, and that's where Cold Trickle was from. And I looked on IMDb, and that's where they have the list of movies that you would be credited with. And I don't know why I looked there, because I've never heard of you being in movies, but you were in Ski School 2 and Downhill Willie, it looks like. How does that even happen?
Oh, yeah. I was, man. I actually was the stunt double. I did all the skiing for the hero, the main character. At the time I got those roles, I was a competitive mogul skier. Like
You're on the national team at that point?
I was either on the National World Cup team or a development team at that point. So they used to just film a lot of stuff in Whistler, and I was living out in Whistler with the crew, and someone let us know, hey, they're looking for skiers for this movie they're filming. And myself and a bunch of the other guys, it was like Shane Zox and Mike Douglas and a whole bunch of us. We all were sort of training and living and hanging together, and we found out about this thing. So we sort of all got spots. It was funny, actually. Shane Zox was the skinniest of all of us, and he got the fat man. They put him in this 350-pound fat man suit. I was the main character. I got to double the main character. I think Mike Douglas was the villain. There was one scene where me and Mike Douglas had to go down the World Cup mogul course in Whistler, fighting each other with ski poles while wearing downhill suits. It was surreal. It was a trip, man. But yeah, super fun. So that's me. If you watch Ski School 2, all the shots of the main character skiing is actually me. What's funny is out of all the shit we did for that movie, the sketchiest of it all was there's a scene where, and I can't even remember which of the movies it was, but there's a scene where the main character is out of his skis. Like he's taking his skis off and he's standing there watching something, and he takes a step back and falls down this giant slope, like just does a ragdoll tumble down a pitch without skis on. It's like a slip and fall, tumble down a steep pitch. And that was the scariest stunt out of all the shit we had to do for that movie. It was so gnarly because they filmed it on the glacier in the summertime, so the snow was super soft. And I had to just repeatedly hurl myself into this violent tomahawk down this steep slope. But it was so soft that your feet would punch through everything. So I was like, I'm going to post hole a leg through and tomahawk over it and like tear a leg off. Like,
yeah.
It was pretty funny. You know, you were like, oh, did you have to do some crazy shit? I'm like, well, the one where they just made me throw myself into a fall without skis, that was the craziest. More so than any of the shit we did on skis. It was pretty funny. But that was super fun. There was a lot of cool opportunities for us in the 90s in Whistler as freestyle skiers. You know, we'd do that. I'd do these really weird photo shoots for all these Japanese clothing brands. We'd put on tassels and go shred around.
I remember Zoc saying he did a whole bunch of stuff with Japanese clothing brands. He had Goldwyn. I think he was like sponsored by Goldwyn.
Yeah, man. I mean, a lot of what happened to me in my whole ski career, Zox has a lot of, without him, I don't know if it would have happened. Like my very first trip out to Whistler to a national development team training camp, the first time I got picked for the national development team, he was also one of the members of that team at the time. And I drove out in my mom's old 78 Dodge van, piece of shit that barely made it there. My plan was sleep in this van because I didn't have any money. Like my family's never had money. So it was just like, okay, drive this beater van out to Whistler, find somewhere to park it and sleep and do this training camp. And that was my plan, which wasn't a great plan, but it's better than nothing. Shane invited me to come stay with him. Sort of as of day one, I showed up all dusty and shit. Somehow I'm like, yeah, well, you know, I slept beside the garbage dump last night in my van. I'm trying to figure out somewhere to park. Don't know what I'm going to do for showers. And he's like, dude, just come stay at my place. So Shane took me in, and he had this really cool house in Whistler, and a whole bunch of us from freestyle would stay with him. Myself, Mark McDonnell, Mike Douglas was always around. And then that whole group of us got kind of identified and reeled in by these Japanese ski sponsor. There's a guy in Whistler who was Japanese but living in Whistler, and he had all these connections with the ski industry in Japan, and he would just get us all this work doing the weirdest, most embarrassing photo shoot stuff you've ever heard. It was pretty funny because we were so young. We would somehow be resentful at like, oh, you know, I've got to look stupid in this, you know, I got to put on this stupid costume and do this dumb shit. But in hindsight, it's like, dude, you're 19 years old getting paid to go skiing. We were so lucky. Like, it was just so lucky that we had that. You know?
For you, it's one thing. For Shane, it's a different thing because he lives a charmed life. He was adopted into a family, I think, that had some wealth, and he was able to invite you guys to all live with him. But for you to have a paid opportunity had to be a big deal for you because you're dirtbagging it and you're lucky to live at Shane's place. But then people start paying you to do stuff. It's got to feel pretty good and got to make your life a lot easier.
Oh, it was huge because my first few years on the national team, I was still working in the pulp mill out here in the East Kootenays to pay for my skiing, which was a pretty horrible job, like crawling around in chemical vessels with a hazmat suit on. Like,
ugh.
just grinding away this like pulp mill job, and then I'd still ski patrol when I could in the winter. Whenever I came home, I'd patrol, and then the patrol boss at the time was really cool. He would give me time off to go compete. But yeah, I was fully just trying to work in any way I could to come up with the money to pay for traveling to training camps and competitions. And so it was usually every spring after the Mogul competition season wrapped up, we'd get a month to 6 weeks of work with these guys where we'd just have to go up and put on these crazy Japanese ski suits and get filmed. And they paid us, I can't remember what it was, but they paid us really well, certainly given our other opportunities to make money at the time. So it was huge. It's funny how life just, there's these moments where, oh, if that hadn't happened, if I hadn't bumped into Shane that day and got invited to stay at his house, I wonder where things would have ended up. Would I have just burned out after 2 months of trying to be on the team because I just couldn't come up with the money to do it? And then if we hadn't met Hide, if we hadn't got this work skiing. So yeah, pretty cool how life puts these moments in front of you. And I just got lucky with some really cool ones coming up in front of me and some cool people helping it happen.
And as far as moguls go, things start to really click for you in 97 and 98, I feel like. That's when you're on a bunch of NORAM podiums. Does it feel like things are finally coming together for you and you finally have almost like a new belief in yourself that you can compete with the best?
Yeah, it was right around that time. So, I always worked super hard. I was really motivated. I had, as most people did, quite a few injuries along the way. My first few years, I kept smoking my knees with just cartilage stuff. So I was kind of on and off injured a bit the first few years, so it didn't make too much progress. And then, I think it was right around that time, 95, 96, 97, 98. All those years, I did hit this stretch where I really, really started killing it on the NORAM tour.
97, 98, you're on the podium like 6-7 times at least.
Yeah, and I won the NORAM overall in singles and duels. And yeah, those years, for sure, that gave me the confidence that, all right, I'm ready to really step into the World Cup team now and kick some ass. And they had a term for athletes who were on the national development mogul team, but were getting World Cup starts here and there. And that was the taxi squad. The team at the time, there was the World Cup team, which was the Jean-Luc Brassard, John Smart, these guys, right? They were the World Cup team. They were skiing full World Cup. And then there was the national development team, which skied NORAMs. And then there was people who would get these taxi squad spots where you'd be kind of on the development team, but you get to go start in a World Cup. And so I spent a lot of years on the taxi squad, and I was starting to get pretty pissed off because I think there was a couple of years where I did almost every World Cup of the year, but still didn't get assigned to the World Cup team the next year, would still get put on the development team, which was the NORAM team, but then I'd ski all the World Cups. So I was bitter about that. Like, this is bullshit. Put me on the World Cup team.
Did you always feel like a second-class citizen in the Canadian program until maybe 99 when you were fully put on the team?
I think I felt just the human nature of, oh, this is poor me. This is a little unfair towards me, whatever it was. I think it's pretty easy for anyone to have those kind of thoughts. So I just remember I was pretty pissed off at not being moved up to the World Cup team when I thought I deserved a spot on the World Cup team. Like, the year before I got moved to the World Cup team, there was a couple of my buddies on the development team who we had identical results and they got pulled up and I didn't. And I'm like, this is bullshit. I had some conflict with the association over that, just purely that I'm like, hey, I deserve a World Cup team spot. You're not giving it to me. So I'm pissed off. Do
you attribute that to age? It's like they didn't want to put you on because you're old?
Exactly. I do. Because now I'm 28 or 26, 27 at this point, whatever the heck it was. Yeah, so I felt a little oppressed by my age. I'm like, this is bullshit that no one's giving me the fair shake here because they think I'm too old and I'm not going to go anywhere. And I think that probably helped drive me to work really hard. So I feel like I kind of lost track of what the original question was there.
So 99 is your first full year on the World Cup team. And I would think that's like a whole nother way of life. International travel, not knowing the languages everywhere you go, and a lot of things that could become a challenge for you. And it's not like you're rolling in cash at that point. Is everything fully funded by Team Canada? Like you don't have to worry about anything but skiing and that finally happens for you?
Well, I'll back up a bit because, as I said, at least it wasn't quite completely new with all the global travel. Because as part of the taxi squad, I had actually done quite a bit of international travel to World Cup already. So that part I was a little bit used to. I kind of knew the scene. I did get, as soon as I made it onto the World Cup team, I got a higher level of funding, which was great. The funding, the way it worked for us was there's a little bit of funding you get from Sport Canada, which Sport Canada provides funding to athletes in all sports, well, all Olympic sports, depending on results. So I was getting some direct Sport Canada funding, and then I was getting some national team funding, which the association has their own funding policies. I think by 99 was when I started to get to a point where it's like, okay, finally, I'm a full World Cup team member. I've got better funding. I qualified for world championships. I started getting better results in World Cups. I hit a bunch of top 10s and a top 5 in Blackcomb, I think. I never did get a World Cup podium, which just gets me to this day. Like I just am so pissed that I never pulled that off, because I think there was a point where I was probably capable of it, but I just missed it. But yeah, 99 was really funny because there was this whole group of us, the most competitive guys on the taxi squad through that 97, 98, 99 period were myself, JP Auclair, JF Couson, Douglas, right? There was all of us, and we were sort of the top taxi squad guys. There was Mark McDonnell, but he moved up to the World Cup team a couple years before me. So we were on the team together, and he had got a World Cup start pretty early.
Okay.
And then there was myself, Shane, Mike, JP, JF, all that crew. And we were getting the odd World Cup start here and there, but we were all really fighting to get onto that World Cup team. And then, of course, dabbling with the new school stuff too that was starting to emerge. So, yeah, I think it was 99 was the year that I cracked through. There was one World Cup team spot, and it came down to between me and Couson. And we sort of battled it out, and I got the spot. I moved on to the World Cup team. And so it was this like, oh my God, like, this is so awesome. Like, how many years have I been working towards this? This is great. And then all those guys just drifted out and just sort of went into full on new school stuff. And within 2 years, I was like, oh, I wonder if that was a mistake. All of a sudden, these guys are the superstars, you know? But it was awesome. It was, it was so rewarding because I had just worked so damn hard to get there. And then I had a couple decent years on World Cup and was tracking well. And then I wrecked myself hard, broke my pelvis. It was within a couple days of my 30th birthday, World Cup in Deer Valley, Utah, and just lost control at super high speed on hard bumps and hip checked one, broke my pelvis. That really shifted the trajectory of my career in a massive way at that point.
Yeah, because you finished off the 99 year with a trip to World Championships. I think you were 9th in the World Championships, and everything's going your way. While there's also the new school movement going, the new Canadian Air Force, when you made that team, all those dudes were pissed off at the rules. They didn't really like all the direction that was going with Moguls, so they all kind of bumped out of there, and you stuck with Moguls, and you end up breaking yourself, like you say. That sucks, because 2000 is supposed to be your year, and it's not like you do a knee, so it's something that I'm sure you're confident that you can come back from, because it's a pelvis that hurts really bad, and it's a terrible break, but do you have the belief when you're in the hospital and everything's come together that you can come back as strong as you were beforehand?
Man, I can't remember where my head was at in the hospital at that time, but it certainly shook my confidence. And I feel like more than anything, it shook my motivation a bit. I did heal up from that injury, and I came back into skiing as soon as I could, but I didn't. And this is absolutely a huge regret to me in hindsight. I didn't put the level of work in after that injury that I was putting in before it, which isn't to say I didn't coast. I didn't get super lazy. I don't know if I just was so deflated from it or fatigued from all the years of doing it or whatever, but I just didn't quite work as hard at the same level. And I didn't have quite the same level of just pure life commitment towards everything in my life is about just making me better at the sport as I did before I got hurt. So when I came back, I was not doing anywhere near as well as before that injury. And I think it was probably more about just this weird mental shift that occurred within me than the physical injury itself, because it was a bad injury and it put me out for a while. But everyone at high level sport has bad injuries that they deal with in rehab. And I certainly could have got myself back into decent shape, but not back into the caliber of shape that I had once had been. Probably some of it was fatigue, because now I'd been doing moguls for quite a long time. And yeah, there was this whole, did I blow it by not leaving moguls to just become, a new Canadian Air Force superstar? And I had weird resentment towards the industry and stuff. Like the year before I made the World Cup team, I remember arguing with the Canadian Oakley rep about, hey man, like look, I'm skiing all the World Cups. I'm doing pretty good. Can you give me a contract or something? And he said, no, the contracts are reserved for people on the World Cup team. I was like, okay. And then the next year I made the World Cup team. That was the year that me and Cousin were fighting for the World Cup team spot. And the next year, so then I made it. And then the next year, Cousin gets the big Oakley contract. And I call the guy up. I'm like, dude, what the fuck? Like, seriously, bro? Like, I sent you all this film stuff I'd been doing, and you told me your contracts were for World Cup skiers. Then I make the World Cup team, and now you're telling me your contracts are for the film skiers. Obviously, they were reacting to the times. It was the right move on their part, of course.
But you felt slighted.
I sure felt slighted and took offense to it. And then even the whole narrative, sort of what you just said about how a lot of these guys left Moguls because they were pissed off at the rules and stuff. I actually don't think that's entirely accurate, to be honest. Certainly, it's accurate that people were pissed off at the rules a bit. I was too. I wanted to do flips before they let us, things like that. But I think athletes in every sport will find rules to be pissed off about. Talk to an NFL player making millions, they'll give you a bunch of shit they don't like in their sport. So I don't think people left for that reason. I think that's a little more of a really cool Hollywood version story of it, like the rebel who was oppressed and left kind of thing. I think people left because they just found the other stuff to be really cool and fun, and that had more appeal to them, so they wanted to do that. It feels to me like this almost kind of long-standing myth in ski culture that, oh yeah, new school skiing was started by all these guys who hated what Moguls was doing to them. It's like, no, they didn't. It was started by guys who saw snowboarders doing cool shit in park features and said, that looks fun. Let's try it on skis.
Yeah.
That was the draw. No one ever does something because they don't like something else. They do something because there's an appeal in doing it. So that was kind of, I always felt that was sort of weird too, because I was like, man, some of these guys would have jumped at the chance to take a World Cup start had they made it.
Right.
And now the story is like, oh, these guys were awesome, but that sport sucked. So they left to do something cool. And there was such a weird backlash and the fist sucks stickers and all that shit. And I think some of it was certainly valid, but I think a lot of it was overhyped into sort of, there was just this narrative that I never completely agreed with. And also in part probably because I was a bit jealous, because I was like, damn, I'm the guy who sort of did the opposite of this, because I had started out with some game in that space, and then I made it on the side that I was trying to, and all of a sudden now I'm like in the not cool side and everyone else is cool. What the fuck? So I think some of it was just me being bitter, but I felt like there was a bit of this sort of sour grapes story that lives on today on how new school skiing started.
For sure. I mean, if you're going to ask any of them about the narrative, it's they were pissed off about the rules. No one ever says, oh, I saw snowboarding. And I mean, people do say that. But when you talk to the players that we're talking about, it was an objection to the rules that were going on in Moguls, and they wanted to find something else, and they were visionaries, where at the time, I guess you could look at it like maybe it wasn't even visionary. It was like a happy accident. They just saw what somebody else was doing and like, hey, I want to do that too. And it created a whole different aspect to the sport.
Yeah, in my opinion, that's exactly what it was. It was just like, holy shit, this stuff is cool and super fun, so let's go with it. And then especially if you're someone who's spent 6-7 years on the development team trying to make the World Cup team and you haven't made it, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to move to this other thing. Yeah, it bummed me out a bit that some of them then just turned around and shit on this thing that they had spent so much time trying to be a part of. And I'm like, some of you guys are just shitting on it because you didn't make it.
Yeah.
And I think the person who did that the least, which always was one thing among a million things that I loved about his character, was JP. JP was the one guy who I don't remember ever really saying anything bad about Moguls. And whereas it almost felt like the worse someone had been at Moguls, the more they shit talked it. There were some guys who really didn't get very far at all on the development team and then just turned that around to, I was on the national team and then the sport just sucked. And so I left. Like, no, dude, you didn't make it. You weren't even close to ever getting invited to a World Cup. For sure, that's my perspective on it, which is jaded. It's absolutely true that there were a lot of issues within the sport, mainly around judging. And the way the thing was judged, it was a competitive thing. So people skied strategically within that format. And all of a sudden you had a lot of people doing the same thing. And so it wasn't creative enough anymore. And I felt that way myself as well. But I didn't feel like that was a reason to say the whole sport sucked. I'm like, yeah, that's an area in the sport that's not great and needs improvement. But there's a million other things about being an athlete on the national mogul team that are just unbelievably awesome.
Right.
It's still incredibly challenging. And like, there's all this shit about moguls that right now I look at what's going on in moguls now and I have tons of critique. I'm like, oh my God, what have they done to that sport? Looking at the way they're building these big air sites in the middle of courses, and it's super easy for anyone to do jumps now, and you don't have to land in moguls. They're not allowed to do doubles. So I'm the same. I can look at that sport now and pick out a bunch of things about it that I disagree with. And that if I were an athlete competing in it, I'd be bitching about. But I still just think it's awesome. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was the same. Like, I thought moguls was awesome. And people are like, oh my God, you're just doing twisters and spreads. And it's like, yeah, okay. I did a quadruple daffy on the bottom air in Japan on a steep World Cup mogul event. Maybe that's not cool, but do you know how fucking hard it is?
It's ridiculous.
It's really damn hard. And so I felt like people started just shitting on this stuff that it wasn't fair to shit on. It's like, oh, that's just so stupid and lame. It's like, no, it's not. It's just not what you're into now. A bit of that is just young people. Whatever they're into is cool. Whatever they're not is not cool. And you've seen it with freestylers, shit talk racers, and then new schoolers shit talk traditional freestyle. And soon it's going to be someone else shit talking new school. That's a little bit of, I think, just
part of life. Yeah.
Part of life. And especially when you got younger people, is there's so much just kind of identity, ego driven side to this sport and culture that there's a lot of people who just want to be able to feel that the one thing they're doing is the coolest and everything else is lame.
Yeah.
And that really, really hit hard. And it always bugged the shit out of me, to be honest. I'm like, man, I don't like these guys shitting on this sport. Like, I think you can be critical of the areas in the sport where there needs to be differences, but without kind of talking it down as much as some people did.
For sure. And Trennon, at this point, we've been going for quite a while. I was told that you weren't a talker, so I didn't think we would go this far with only getting through a part of my notes. But you know what? I think we should do a part 2, because I think you and I sitting on a telephone for like 3 hours would be painful and we'd want to shoot ourselves in the face. So how about we revisit this podcast one day next week and do another hour and have a part 2 with you? Would you be down for that?
Yeah, no problem, man.
Okay, well, before we do that, though, I have to get into a segment of my show that I call Inappropriate Questions.
Oh, nice. I have no idea what that could be about.
Yeah, well, I had you on this for part of the show months ago, and you asked Rory Bushfield some questions, and we got some great answers from him. But now I gave him the opportunity to ask you 3 inappropriate questions, and normally I would play them for you, but I don't need to because I didn't record them with Rory. He sent them over to me, and I'm going to read you his question number 1, and it is, have you ever experienced a case of road rage?
Holy shit. Yes, I have. Yeah, well, multiple. I can be a bad road rager, but the one he's talking about is, this is terrible, man. I was running Momentum Ski Camp, the free ride side of Momentum Ski Camp on the glacier for a few years.
Yep.
And holy shit, it was such hard work. I was kind of one man showing it. I was sleeping on top of the mountain in the ski patrol hut and just moving rails by myself in the morning before the crew showed up, and then being the head coach and then going down and putting groups together. I had this job where I had just overwhelmed myself beyond belief. And I was just in this permanent state of stress for kind of 6 weeks through the camps. And yeah, one day I pull up to the 3-way stop in Whistler and this guy burns me. I had this big F-250 truck and he cuts in front of me when it's my turn. And I just burn into the back of him. Like, I just rammed him.
You stepped on the gas.
Oh yeah. I stepped on the gas and just rammed him. And then I just pulled up beside him and gave him the finger and burned off.
No.
Oh yeah. Terrible, right? And then probably within 5 minutes, I was on the side of the road somewhere parked going, holy shit, what the fuck did you just do, buddy? Like, oh my God. And that was when I decided, I'm like, I can't do this job anymore. I was so stressed out. Not that that's an excuse. No one should do anything like that. It's a terrible thing to do. I didn't ram a guy to a point of, I don't think, endangering anyone, but I probably put a dent in his bumper. I definitely road raged. And yeah, that was my cue that, okay, man, you got to change your job situation here because look what this just turned you into. This is awful.
That's
you
crazy.
Shouldn't be this. So yeah, I did road rage in the worst way. I'm a full road raging asshole.
All right. Well, we will go with question number 2 after that one. Have you ever almost hang glided into a waterfall before?
I used to hang glide a lot when I was young, and then I've gotten back into it recently. I spent the spring building a new launch ramp off a cliff in the Squamish Valley, and I wanted to see if I could make it from this ramp across the valley, across the river to this really cool waterfall. And there's a setting on a hang glider called the VG, where when you tighten it all the way up, you get a better glide, but the thing doesn't turn very well.
Okay.
It locks it in to give you a better glide so that you can cover more distance without losing height. So to make it to this waterfall was going to be a real challenging glide. So I launched, pulled my VG full on. So now I'm locked in full VG. So the thing's gliding really well, tracking really well. And I'm getting over to this waterfall, and I made it. As I get to the falls, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. I'm going to hook a hard left. And I wanted to almost kind of swoop through, like right in front of the water.
Okay.
My turn. But as I get close to the waterfall, I start hitting some weird air currents, probably because of the waterfalls cooling the air in that area. So I have temperature differentials in the air, making it turbulent. So I hit a bit of weird turbulence, and it's trying to bump me to the right, and I'm trying to turn left. I just get on the left turn and nothing happens. I get harder, nothing happens. Get harder, nothing happens. It's like, this thing ain't turning. And I had to actually abort at the last second and go into a hard 270 to the right, because that's what the air was trying to push me into a right turn. I was trying to left turn. And the issue was I had neglected to release my VG to put it back in kind of turn responsiveness. Like your glider can be either really responsive for turning, or it can lock into this high glide but doesn't turn well. So it was pilot error that put me in that situation. But for a couple seconds, like, oh shit, I'm going to crash straight into this waterfall. You idiot. But I didn't.
But you pretzeled out?
I pretzeled out. Yeah, exactly. I pretzeled out and then went and landed at the beach by Rory's. It was quite exciting.
Well, speaking of exciting, his last inappropriate question is, what did you say to Rory after almost crashing midair into a helicopter?
I swore at him and I told him, I was something to the effect of, don't ever make me a part of your bullshit like that ever again or something. That was so hectic, dude. You've seen, I'm sure, Rory's wing surfing where he gets up on his wing and stands there. So I have my pilot's license as well, and Rory would always let me fly his plane, which was awesome. And I had flown the plane for him quite a few times with him jumping out, either jumping out the door, or he likes to do this thing where he gets on his leading edge of his wing and he sort of hand over hands it out to the wingtip and drops from there. And so I'd done quite a few of his drops. But when he learned how to get up on top of the wing and surf it, I hadn't been the pilot to do that with him.
Okay.
There was another guy, much more experienced than I, who had done that for his first few wing walks. Anyway, he asked me if I would do it. And I'm like, okay, give me the notes, because it gets really hard to control the plane when someone's out there on the wings, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I haven't done this, but yeah, sure. I'll give her a shot. And then he's like, yeah, I'm going to get it filmed. Like, okay. And then we get to the airport and I find out it's a heli that's filming it. He's telling the helicopter, oh, just fly overhead to get the view. And I'm like, no, don't fly overhead. Like, you can't do that. We're going to get in prop wash, and that's real bad for the plane. And then the weather is real shit. It's not a good day for this. It's raining a bit and the clouds are down super low. We've only got maybe 2,800 feet of height before the clouds. And this is the kind of thing that you would want to do at 8,000 feet, where there's tons and tons of airspace to get out of shit if you get in trouble. Bushy being Bushy. And he's like, oh, we're fine. Just do it. So anyway, we get up there. We're over the spit in Squamish. I got this helicopter off to my side. Everything's super loud, right? The door's off because Rory's going to climb out the door. We can't hear anything. He's yelling at me directions for what to do. I'm trying to get the plane configured right for it to really be controllable while this happens. And I'm messing around with flap settings and prop settings and all this bullshit. And he's kind of half crawling out and yelling shit at me that I can't hear. And I got this helicopter off to the side of me. It's raining and we're close to the ground. And next thing you know, he gets up on top of the wing and I am just blowing it with controlling this plane while he's on top. To this day, I'm like, I don't know what I wasn't getting right, but I wasn't getting it right. I just could not get this thing stabilized. So I'm trying my best to stabilize the plane and it's all over the place. And he's up on top. I can't see him now, of course, because he's on top of the wing. So I can't see him up there, but I can sure feel him. Next thing you know, I just feel the plane get pitched over to the right into a spin. And I know the heli's on that side of us. And what had happened is he had kind of got up and then he walked over to the end of the wing.
Okay.
And it just stalled that wing and dropped it. Now I'm going into this kind of semi-inverted spin.
Rolling towards the heli?
Well, towards the heli and the ground at the same time. And we don't have much altitude, right?
Oh, that's right.
And all of a sudden now I'm free falling, kind of semi-inverted in a spin, just looking at the ground. I was wearing a parachute at the time because that's a good idea. If you got someone jumping out of your plane, as the pilot should wear a chute too, because if anything goes wrong, it will, in many cases, be the guy flying the plane who gets in trouble, because the guy jumping out smokes something, hits the tail rudder, breaks the plane or something.
Yep.
He's fine. The pilot's left in this busted plane. So anyways, now I'm that guy, because I'm like, okay, I know Rory's probably off at this point because we're upside down. So he's probably off. He's got a parachute. He's fine. Where the hell is this helicopter that was right beside me? And I'm in an upside down spin. What do I do? And I had this split second of, do I try and get out, just jump out of this plane and parachute and just abandon the plane over downtown Squamish and kill people? Or do I try and save it and recover from the spin? Anyway, I recovered the plane from the spin and flew back, and I was so mad. Yeah. When I find, like, he comes up to me with his big Rory smile, because to him it was all just part of the daily epic life-threatening adventure that is his life. Fuck. It's probably the only time I've ever really gotten mad at him, like really, really gave him a fucking stern, like, fuck you, man. This was bullshit. Don't put me in that position. I'm never doing that shit for you again, kind of thing. Yeah. I don't know who told you I'm not a talker, because I give the longest answers to your questions, bro.
Yeah, I expected it was going to be like pulling teeth, but it definitely wasn't. And it's been like a history lesson and just an awesome podcast so far. So for now, I want to say have a great rest of your Saturday, and we will talk again next week, man. Thank you for your time.
Right on. Thanks, Mike.
So that was part 1 with Trennon Paynter, and man, I had no idea he was going to be such a talker. I went into this one thinking it was going to be like pulling teeth for answers, and boy was I wrong. Trennon had so much cool shit to talk about, and I didn't cut him off at all. And I knew that after 15 minutes of us still being on the intro topic, that this would be a 2-parter. And when I was prepping for this podcast, I thought the stuff we just covered was going to be the boring part. But it wasn't. It was amazing, and part 2 is going to be even more awesome. So that's the show. At this point, it's time for the review of the week. And this one comes in from Iceland, and it's from Kitty Mag. It's a 5-star review, and the title is I Would Like a Beanie. Here's the review. Honestly, I wrote this to get the beanie. The podcast is great usually. Depends on the guest, obviously. Mike is pretty consistent. Well, I can't say that's the most amazing review I've ever had, but it kind of reminds me of those homeless people who have a sign that says, I need $1 for beer, or I need $1 for weed. Those are the people that I give $1 to. And this guy or this girl, Kitty Mag, well, I would give a beanie to you, but you don't live in the US, and like I've said on many podcasts, I am too cheap to ship internationally, and I hate doing the international paperwork. So what I will do is I'll send a beanie to anyone of your choice in the United States. All you need to do is email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com with an address of someone in the US that you would like to gift a beanie, and I will send it their way. I thank you for that review. I appreciate you being very honest and telling me why you reviewed me because you want a beanie. They are amazing beanies from Cole Headwear. They're limited edition. They're comfortable. They're great. And a friend of yours will be able to get one. For anyone else that wants to play this game and get a beanie, all you need to do is put a review on iTunes or somewhere else. If you put a review elsewhere, please email me a screenshot of it at mike@thepowellmovement.com. And if I read your review on the show, send that same email address a message with your shipping info, and I'll send you a limited edition Powell Movement beanie. If you're outside of the US, well, you know my drill on how I do. I'm sorry, I wish I could ship to everyone, but I can't. At this point, I want to thank everyone for listening and ask you to buy stuff from my sponsors. I only work with the best, and they are Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Stanley, Alpine Vans, Dragon Alliance, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and Rollerblade. Have a great week, everyone.